Okay, so today I wanted to talk about drop voicings, particularly how they're used, what are they, and demystify them a little bit. For a lot of people, unless you're a jazz pianist or a jazz arranger, drop voicings are a bit mysterious and they seem like they're this really scary thing that makes no sense, but in reality they're super simple. I want to break it down for a lot of you. So before we can talk about drop voicings, we have to talk about what are closed position voicings, and that's also a super simple concept. Closed position voicing is an arrangement of a chord that fits within one octave. For a D minor 7, a closed position voicing of a D minor 7 could look something like this. We have a D minor 7 with the D as the top note and the FAC right underneath it. We can also make a closed position voicing of a G7 chord by taking those two middle notes and bringing them down a whole step. And finally, we could take a C major 7 voicing by bringing those outside notes and bringing them down. Now what you may notice is that there's not a lot of room in the top two voices. There's only a half step between the C and the B natural in the C major 7 chord. And this is where the magic of a drop 2 voicing comes in. Now all a drop 2 voicing does is it takes the second highest pitch in the voicing and it drops it down an octave. For the D minor 7, we're going to take the C and we're going to drop it down an octave. And if we do the same thing for the G minor 7, we're going to have a similar voicing. And finally, for the C major 7, we're going to have a lot more space for the C and the B natural. Sometimes a drop 2 alone does not give the same effect that you're trying to give. And if you want a large, wide open voicing, it may be helpful to drop even more notes down an octave. So keeping with this rule, we could take the second and fourth notes from the original voicings and drop those down an octave as well. For a D minor 7, that would sound something like this. What's great about changing voicings is you can change who has the moving lines without altering the melody of the song. So now we have both of the inner voices moving on the G7. Like I said before, the main appeal of having drop 2 and 4 voicings is having nice, lush, open chords like this C major 7. Now there's one more drop voicing that we haven't talked about, mostly because it doesn't get used as often, but it's called the drop 3. And just like the other two, it's as simple as it sounds. You take the third highest voice from the top and drop it down an octave. So instead of this closed position D minor voicing, we now will have this as our D minor voicing. Again, for G, we now have this as our voicing. And then for C major 7, this is our voicing. Now, that's all the different drop voicings. But now you have to ask yourself, when do you use these voicings? And that's where things get interesting. Now I'm going to write a very simple melody that I will then harmonize using different types of drop voicings. Next, let's decide what these chords are going to be. Now, are these the most interesting chords for this melody? Probably not, but it's going to give us a good exercise to start off. So we'll start by harmonizing all of these using closed position chords. So for this D on an E half diminished 7, we're going to do something like this. Next we have an E on an E half diminished, so we're going to do something like this. For this A7, we have an F in the melody. So instead of using a normal E natural for the 5, we're going to substitute that E to be an F natural or an E sharp to be a sharp 5 instead. That gives us this voicing. For the G, we can stay on an A7 sharp 5, or we can move to an A7, just a normal A7. I think I like the normal A7. For the D minor 7, we now have an E natural. So this brings us to an important topic. Typically, the 9 is seen as a substitution for the root, which means that this E natural, instead of playing a D natural right underneath it, we're going to be playing a C. So that leaves us with this. This G7 is another problem because we have a C natural in the melody, which leads us to believe that this is not just a G7, but a G7 sus. And since it's a sus chord, we're going to change the third to be the fourth, which sounds like this. Finally, our C major 7 ends on the 9 again, which means that it's going to be a substitution for the root. Now we gotta ask ourselves, what does this actually sound like? It's a little melodramatic, but I think it's functional. Now let's reorchestrate this so there's a little bit more clarity in the voicings. The first thing that I noticed is that for the second beat, there's a whole step between the top two voices. Now, this isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, but it does obscure what the melody line is gonna be. So let's do a drop 2 voicing for that chord instead. Aside from that, there are no glaringly obvious harmonic choices that are bad, but there are some things that we could do a little bit more interesting. So for the A7, we can use a drop 3 voicing to continue a downward melodic line for the lowest voice. And now that fourth voice is looking a little bit lonely down there. So what I'm going to do for the fourth voicing is do a drop 2 and 4 to spread out everything. Then for the second measure, I like everything condensing back down on the D minor 7. It's like everything got spread too thin for the fourth voice and then had to collapse back down. So it's a kind of cool effect. So I'm going to keep the closed voicings for both the D and the G sus. But what I will change is the last chord, where I'm going to have a nice lush sound for the C major 7. And that can only really be done with a drop 2 and a drop 4. That's literally the lowest note you can play on a trumpet. So I hope it sounds in tune. Now, some last things to consider. Typically speaking, you don't want to do these drop voicings for a harmonizing trumpet section. I'm a trumpet player, so that's what I did. But drop voicings sound really, really beautiful on sax sections since they blend so well and they already have a very wide range. But for trumpets and trombones, typically you want to use the fact that they have power in triadic structures, so closed position voicings work a lot better for them. But these aren't hard and fast rules, so use your ears to decide what sounds good. Also, for this example, I tried avoiding using any type of approach harmony, but if you really want to spice up your voice letting, that may be something to consider. And I'll have a video on that pretty soon. Yeah, that's what drop voicings are. And I think you can agree they're a lot simpler than what they initially sound like. And that's it, so bye.